So let's move on now and let's discuss cladistics. This is going to be your introduction to cladistics. This is something that we're going to talk about a lot in this class, and I ask you to be able to read evolutionary trees. But as an introduction, let's go through a non-biological example so that we can all make sure that we have a pretty good foundation of understanding how we make these trees, these cladistic trees. So you can see I've set this up to be kind of like a timeline. On the very left, you have evolutionary time. On the bottom of the screen is the past, and as we go up, we go forward in evolutionary time until we get to the present day. We're going to look at this example organism. Well, in this case, it's not an organism, but it's a telephone. So we'll say this is the common ancestor telephone. We know there's a lot of different telephones now, but this is, let's say, where we're starting as far as what the original telephone is in this example. I know there's some older examples, but this is the one we're going to start at. It's like a 1960s rotary phone or something like that. On the far right, you can see there's a blue box, and that's called a state change. And whether or not the state change is on the tree, it's implicit in the branching. That will be more clear as we go through this example. So let's look at this telephone common ancestor. Remember, this is a rotary phone, so to dial it, you have to stick your finger in the number hole and like rotate it, and it's analog. This thing really operates off of just like little mechanical parts. But at some point, somebody introduced an electronic circuit that would automatically make the tones that were required in order to make a call. And so that electronic circuit is kind of similar to what we still have on a lot of what we call landline phones. So you can see that's a state change. That's a change from the rotary phone to the push button landline phone. That happened in the past sometime, and to this day we still have landline phones, even though they're not terribly common. We still have landline phones, and you can push the button, but when you push the button, it goes through a little electronic circuit, and then it makes the call that way. Now, you can see that the landline phone is lined up with the present day mark on the very left in evolutionary time. That's to suggest that landline phones can be found today. So they're what we call extant. That means not extinct. Another state change that occurred sometime in the past was the development of wireless cell phone towers. So these cell phone towers enabled us to have phones that worked not connected, not plugged in. They worked away from these landlines. So we call those cellular phones because they work off that cell phone tower system. And of course, today we still have cellular phones. That probably doesn't look like a cellular phone that you use today, but 15, 20 years ago, that was a cellular phone. So the state change that occurred between that rotary phone and the cellular phone, there's two state changes. One, we went from this rotary phone to an electronic circuit, and then we started using these wireless cell towers, right? Well, there was another state change where we installed these phones into our cars. And you may or may not be familiar with this, but we called this a car phone. And this is actually, I think it's illegal now to be driving around yapping on your phone, especially like a big clunky phone like that. But there was a while where people had these phones installed in their cars, and that's not a thing anymore. So we'll say that that's extinct. So you can see that this line doesn't continue to the present day. It stops. That's because that cell phone technology is extinct. And we'll put that there. The car phone is extinct. Now, sometimes you'll see a little cross next to the name of an organism if it's extinct. In this case, we'll add that. But indeed, the car phone is extinct. Now, the extinct car phone has three state changes from that telephone common ancestor. It has an electronic circuit, it has a wireless cell phone tower, the ability to communicate through radio waves, and then it also has the installation in a car that makes that its own unique evolutionary branch. Well, let's look at a last branch here, and we call that a smartphone. Now, that's wildly more popular than these other phones at the present day, but you can still find cellular phones and you can still find landlines if you really look. But the smartphone also has three state changes. Remember, it's not installed in a car. So the car phone and the smartphone both have three state changes. The state changes for the smartphone are that it has an electronic circuit, it has a wireless cell phone tower, and it also has the ability to do computing. It's a mobile computer. So in this way, we're going to look at organisms throughout the semester, and we're going to be looking at trees like this, evolutionary trees. And they may not be oriented bottom to top, they may be side to side, they may be top to bottom, but the idea is that the beginning of the branches is a common ancestor. It's an organism that's further back in evolutionary time. And remember, evolutionary time isn't necessarily scalable, it's relative, right? So here we have an example of evolutionary time that's over the time span of maybe a couple hundred years. But sometimes we'll look at some of these trees and the evolutionary timeline will go back millions of years. Let's look at an actual example of organisms in a cladistic tree. Here you can see this is presented left to right rather than bottom to top. And you can see on the far left is the ancestral bear, the common ancestor to all bears. And then we can see a lot of branching. Well, the assumption in this is that at each one of those branches there's a state change, and that won't always be explicitly described. It won't always say it, but that's kind of implicit, and that state change might be genetic. It might be something that you don't visibly see outside on the outside of the animal, or it might be something morphological, like maybe the development of wings in a bat that separates it from a lot of other mammals. The purpose of these trees is to illustrate the relationships between different organisms. You can see here that the polar bear and the brown bear are each other's closest relatives, and those are on a branch that's sister to this branch that includes the Asiatic black bear, the American black bear, and the sun bear. And so looking at this tree, you kind of have a way to organize these organisms and understand how they're related to each other, and also to understand how unique some of these organisms are. Like the panda bear. The panda bear is on a branch all on its lone self over there, and all the other bears are on another branch.